Welcome back to Duel-Logic. I'm Quinn, and today we're diving into whether the Pentagon should hand military decisions to Elon Musk's controversial Grok AI. I've got Dr. Viktor Hartmann, physicist-turned-epistemologist, Marcus the Mayor Johnson, community organizer from Chicago, Priya Sharma, AI researcher who helped build Earthy GPT systems, and Maverick Mike Torres, serial entrepreneur with strong opinions about everything. Viktor, let me start with you. When the military wants an AI system that recently generated inappropriate content into actual warfare decisions, what's your epistemological alarm bell telling you?
The alarm isn't about the inappropriate content, Quinn. That's almost besides the point. My concern is we are conflating two entirely different questions. Can this system generate coherent outputs, and should those outputs determine who lives and dies? Before we even discuss integration, I need to see the confidence intervals on its decision-making, the failure modes documented, and honest accounting of what we cannot measure. Right now, I'm hearing enthusiasm masquerading as evidence.
Victor's absolutely right that we need to separate those questions. And I'd actually push further. The real problem isn't Grok specifically, it's that we're asking the wrong system to do the wrong job. I work on these systems, and what I can tell you is that language models are fundamentally pattern-matching engines trained on internet text. They're not decision-making systems, and they definitely shouldn't be. What if instead we built AI that information to human commanders, highlighting patterns they'd miss, stress-testing assumptions, but keeps the actual judgment call where it belongs?
You know what strikes me? Nobody's asking the people who actually live with military decisions. The families and neighborhoods where we're testing this stuff, the communities that bear the cost when algorithms get it wrong. Priya, I hear you on the human judgment piece. But here's the thing. If we're building a system that surfaces information to commanders, we need to know information gets surfaced and gets buried. That's not a technical problem. That's a power problem. And with all due respect to the engineers in the room, power problems don't get solved in a lab.
Mike, you've been quiet while we're debating how to make this work better, but should we be asking whether we should automate these decisions at all?
I actually think you're all dancing around the real issue, which is that we're treating military decision-making like it's some sacred exception to how the world actually works. Look, Marcus raises a legit power problem, but the solution isn't to freeze innovation, it's to democratize access to it. The countries that move fast on AI integration will have asymmetric advantages, and sitting on the sidelines doesn't protect communities. It just guarantees we'll be behind when decisions get made anyway. Priya's surfacing information model is closer to right, but here's the thing. If we're serious about human judgment, we need humans who are on what these systems can do, not commanders guessing in the dark.
Mike, hold on. You're saying we need to democratize access to AI military tech? But isn't that exactly backwards? If this stuff is as powerful as you claim, shouldn't we be more worried about concentration of power, not distribution?
No, you've got it backwards. Concentration of power is what happens when one actor has a monopoly on the tech and nobody else can audit or compete against it. The U.S. military having exclusive access to AI capabilities sounds safer until you realize there's zero competitive pressure to build it responsibly. I'm talking about open standards, transparency requirements, and yes, allied nations having the tools to understand and challenge these systems. That's what actually constrains abuse, not secrecy.
Mike, I'm not buying that logic. You're saying democratize access, but then talking about open standards and transparency. Those sound like totally different things to me. Are you actually arguing we should give other countries lethal AI capabilities, or just that they should be able to audit ours?
Mike's conflating three separate propositions and calling it one argument. That's the real problem here. Open standards for a military system is fundamentally different from distributing the capability itself, and pretending they're equivalent obscures what we're actually deciding. Before we even discuss distribution models, we need empirical evidence that this system makes better decisions than human commanders in ambiguous situations, and I haven't seen that data presented.
Mike, I appreciate the competitive pressure argument, but you're talking about this like it's a market problem, when it's actually a trust problem, and those aren't the same thing. In my neighborhood, when we lost trust in institutions, more options didn't fix it. transparency did. So before we're handing this to allies or competitors, somebody needs to explain to the families affected by these decisions how they get a voice in whether the system that targets them is auditable or not.
Priya, you've been listening to this debate about transparency versus trust. But as someone who actually builds these systems, is Marcus right that we're trying to solve a values problem with technical fixes?
Marcus, you're naming something crucial that gets lost in the technical weeds. But here's where I think you and Viktor are actually on the same side. You both understand that a system is only as trustworthy as the one developing it. The technical fix isn't transparency or open standards alone. It's building systems where humans remain genuinely in control and can explain their reasoning to affected communities. That's not a values problem that tech solves. It's a governance problem where tech either enables accountability or obscures it, depending on how we design it.
Mike, Priya just said the solution is keeping humans genuinely in control, but you are arguing for speed and scale. Can you actually have both, or are you willing to admit there's a real trade-off here?
Speed and control aren't opposites. They're codependent. Every startup I've scaled had faster decision-making. We built accountability into the process, not despite it. What Priya's describing, humans explaining their reasoning, that's literally what happens when you force teams to move quickly. You can't hide behind committees. The trade-off Viktor and Marcus are worried about only exists if we treat this like a black box, which we don't have to.
Mike, hold up. You're comparing startup pivots to military decisions where people die. That feels like a pretty massive category error to me. Can you actually defend that analogy, or are you just using accountability as a buzzword here?
The host's instinct is sound. Mike, you're describing organizational velocity in low-stakes environments where you can iterate and learn from failure. In military targeting, you don't get that luxury. What's your confidence that the same accountability mechanisms scale when the cost of error isn't a failed product launch, but civilian casualties? Because explaining your reasoning doesn't retroactively unkill someone.
Viktor's hitting on something I've seen firsthand. Accountability that works in theory falls apart when there's nobody at the table who actually faces the consequences. Mike, your startup teams could iterate because failure meant layoffs, not funerals in somebody's neighborhood. The question isn't whether you explain a decision. It's whether the people harmed by a wrong call get to challenge it. It happens, not after.
Mike, Viktor and Marcus just demolished your startup analogy. Are you actually going to defend comparing product launches to life and death decisions? Or do you want to walk that back and give us a better argument for why speed matters in military AI?
They're hit, but you're both assuming the alternative to speed is safety, when the data actually shows the opposite. Slow military decisions kill people too. Indecision in ambiguous situations has a body count. Marcus knows better than anyone. I'm not saying we should move recklessly, but Viktor, your confidence intervals on making snap calls under fire aren't any better than Gronk's. We just don't measure them the same way.
Mike, that's a fascinating point about unmeasured human error. But aren't you essentially arguing we should automate decisions because we can't measure how bad humans are at them? That seems backwards to me.
Mike's just articulated the argument for replacing human judgment with something we understand even less, which is precisely backwards. Yes, commanders make mistakes under pressure. That's exactly why we need human deliberation in high-stakes calls, not less. And we absolutely can measure human performance if we're serious about it. The fact that we haven't doesn't justify automating the problem away. It justifies finally doing the hard work of measurement.
I think Viktor and Mike are actually both right about something important, but talking past each other. Yes, we can measure human performance better than we do. Viktor's right about that. But Mike's also correct that unmeasured human bias and fatigue kill people in real time, which means we have an obligation to build systems, not replacement ones. The exciting thing is we could design AI that surfaces what a commander might miss under stress, flags contradictions in their reasoning, surfaces alternative scenarios, and keeps them in the loop where accountability actually lives.
Priya, when you say keeps them in the loop where accountability actually lives, what does that look like in practice? because I'm skeptical that a stressed commander getting AI recommendations isn't just going to rubber stamp whatever the system suggests.
That's the real question right there, because rubber stamping happens when people don't feel responsible, and responsibility only sticks when communities can actually hold you accountable. Priya, your augmentation model only works if there's real transparency about the AI flagged something, and crucially, if affected communities have a seat at the table when we're deciding what counts as a contradiction in reasoning worth surfacing. Otherwise, we're just hiding bias behind a veneer of deliberation.
Marcus, that's a powerful point about communities defining what counts as contradiction in reasoning. But Priya, Viktor, and Mike all look like they want to push back hard on different parts of that. Priya, let me start with you. Is Marcus describing a governance problem or a technical one? Both. And that's actually the point Marcus is making that I think we need to sit with. The technical part is real. We can build systems that explicit reasoning from commanders, that surface confidence levels, that force them to articulate why they're disagreeing with the AI's flagged concerns. But that only matters if the governance structure lets affected communities actually challenge those decisions, which means Marcus is right that we can't solve this in the lab alone. Technology amplifies whatever intent is behind it. So if the intent is to obscure accountability, no amount of technical transparency fixes that.
Priya, you've just identified something crucial that everyone keeps dancing around. The system only works if we're honest about what we're measuring and why. But here's where I need to push back gently. Communities defining contradiction in reasoning sounds democratic until you realize we're asking non-experts to evaluate technical outputs they can't possibly verify independently. That's not accountability, that's theater, unless we also fund the infrastructure for genuine technical literacy in those communities.
Viktor, I hear you, and you're right that we can't expect communities to become AI engineers overnight. But here's what I've learned organizing. People don't need to understand the technical specs to know when a decision affects their lives unfairly, and they know what questions to ask if someone's actually listening. The infrastructure problem isn't about making them experts. It's about making sure the experts have to answer to them before and after the system runs.
Mike, you've been listening to Viktor and Marcus debate community oversight, but I'm sensing you think they're both missing something fundamental about how military decisions actually get made under pressure. What's your take?
You're both building perfect systems in your heads, while real commanders are making life or death calls with incomplete information. The actual question isn't whether we can engineer perfect accountability. We can't. It's whether AI-assisted decisions beat human-only decisions in the field, and that requires testing, not endless committee design. Marcus, I agree communities need a voice, but that voice matters infinitely more if we're iterating on A than debating a theoretical one that never ships.
All right, I can see Mike's ready to keep battling this out for another hour, but our clock's about to cut us off mid-argument. Let me get everyone's parting shot on whether we're heading towards smarter warfare or just more dangerous delegation. Viktor, what's the one thing you'd want people to demand before we hand any algorithm the power to target humans?
We've spent this entire conversation debating implementation details when we haven't answered the fundamental question. What evidence would convince any of us this system actually improves military decisions? Mike keeps insisting we test in the field, but testing warfare decisions has a body count, and that's precisely why we need the theoretical work Marcus and Priya are pushing for. The uncomfortable truth is, uncertainty here isn't a bug we can engineer away. It's the permanent condition we are operating in, and pretending otherwise, whether through Mike's speed or anyone's technical elegance, is how catastrophes happen.
Marcus, what's the one thing you tell folks in your neighborhood about this whole debate?
Look, Mike's right that we can't wait for perfect. But Viktor and Priya are right that speed without accountability is just delegation with extra steps. Here's what I'm taking from this. We don't need to choose between moving forward and protecting people. We need to stop pretending those are different things. The communities that live with these decisions aren't obstacles to innovation. They are the whole point of it. And any system that doesn't start there is already broken.
Priya, As someone who actually builds these systems, what's the one thing you wish everyone understood about what we're really choosing here?
Look, I came into this thinking the technical problem was primary, but Marcus and Viktor just showed me it's almost secondary. The real question is whether we're building systems that embolden humans to stay genuinely responsible or systems that let them abdicate it. Mike's right that perfect shouldn't be the enemy of good, but good has to mean decisions we can actually defend to the people living with the consequences, not just decisions that happen faster. We don't need smarter warfare. We need the humility to build tools that strengthen human judgment while keeping humans accountable for what they choose to do with them.
Mike, you've been pushing back all episode. What's the one thing you'd want our listeners to walk away actually doing differently?
Look, Viktor and Marcus forced me to sharpen this. The real danger isn't the algorithm. It's pretending we can design our way out of hard choices about who decides and who pays. But here's what I won't concede. Paralysis dressed up as caution has a body count too. We need to move forward, community input, not instead of it, which means building systems that are auditable in real time, not waiting for perfect governance that never arrives. The question isn't whether we deploy AI in warfare, it's whether we do it with our eyes open or closed.
Thanks to Viktor, Marcus, Priya, and Mike for proving that the hardest questions don't have easy answers, just better arguments. The real choice isn't between human judgment and AI assistance, but between systems that force accountability and ones that let us hide from it. That's Duel-Logic, where we dig into the mess, not around it.